Happy week 4 class. I can't believe we're already halfway there. I will be grading your discussion boards this week, so look for that. I wanted to go over a little bit your paper that is due at the end of this week. You are going to be writing an HIV/AIDS treatment essay. This is a 3-page essay, and it's worth 150 points, and it's just a way for you to describe HIV/AIDS, the effects and the treatment, and you are to follow this rubric right here. Now, this is found in Learning Activities Week 4. Always when you go into learning activities, you will get more description on like what to do during that week. And so in here is the explanation of what to do for the paper. I'm briefly going to go over this, talk about HIV and AIDS a little bit in regards to psychotherapy. But so you're going to have an introduction, a lit review, so getting some journal articles or textbooks with information. You can, and peer-reviewed journal articles, of course. You're going to talk about treatment and how it's changed over time, and it has changed quite a bit from when HIV and AIDS was early discovered to and given a name, and to now with the medications and the pharmaceuticals that they have out there that cause people to not even test positive. It's pretty amazing what they've done. We're going to talk about recovery-oriented principles, and then of course faith integration, and how you would incorporate faith into a diagnosis like HIV/AIDS. It must be an APA formatted paper. Subheaders are required, so introduction paragraph is not labeled, however the remaining sections are. So if you look at here, you see overview of AIDS, manifestation of AIDS, treatment of AIDS, and that's how it goes. Okay? So you will find this, like I said, in week 4. It gives you how we grade each section. So I just wanted to let you know about that. Okay? And the paper. So I'm going to talk a little bit about HIV/AIDS from a therapeutic perspective. So you could potentially get a client that gets diagnosed while underneath your care. And as we know, the diagnosis of AIDS, it isn't a disease that we have a cure for. We have better treatment for it, but we don't have a cure. And so it can be very detrimental to get that diagnosis, and or very discouraging, defeating. Many clients aren't going to be pleased with that sort of diagnosis. And so what I would suggest when clients, when clients get that and coming at it from a therapist, and maybe they're talking to you for the first time after getting that information, there's going to be a lot of feelings. There's going to be a lot of fear of the future. There's going to be fear of pain or suffering or, shame. There could be even suicidal ideation. There could be just a lot of grief. It would be no different than getting a terminal illness diagnosis. It's just like, my life isn't going to be what I expected it to be, so on and so forth. Now, there are many people that have lived a very long time with HIV, and oftentimes they're under that medical treatment where they're getting the medications. We have an example of Magic Johnson. He's had AIDS for a very long time and seemingly seems to be living a very full life. Oftentimes what kills AIDS patients isn't necessary, once it transitions from HIV to AIDS, isn't even the AIDS. It is whatever sickness they get as a result of their body just shutting down, pneumonia, things of that nature. When I was in the program and we had an actual AIDS HIV course we had to take, we watched this documentary, I think a long time ago. It was on HBO, and it kind of talks about where AIDS came from, and then the spread of AIDS, and then everything that went along with it, what people thought. There was a lot of fear associated with it. It was labeled a gay disease, and all those things weren't true. And there were certain populations that were hit more difficult with it, but it was because of a lack of information. And as we know, AIDS can be transmitted through body fluids, through blood, We had famous people who got, I think Arthur Ashe, who got a blood transfusion and the blood was infected. He ended up getting it. And so there was a lot of different ways. Now knowledge is power. That's why we do so much sexual education, to kind of let people know, like, hey, if you're going to have sex, are you having safe sex because of fear of AIDS? No sharing of needles. We shouldn't share needles, assuming that's something people do in the drug community. And then obviously now we test blood, so that blood transfusions, that doesn't accidentally happen and be given to someone. There are a lot of support groups out there for people who have AIDS. I even had a student one time, she worked at a place that was literally for people who have been diagnosed with AIDS. And I think group therapy is like a really awesome tool for someone who has been diagnosed with HIV or AIDS, because it gives you people in your group that have been there and are still living, who have had the diagnosis, and maybe they're 5 years down the line after getting that call that they have that diagnosis. Maybe it's someone who's freshly new with it. Maybe it's someone who's been living years with it. And so it helps someone who's maybe brand new with this information, is very overwhelmed and is very grief stricken, to see that other people are living with it and they can too, to help with the depression, anxiety, the mental health part that comes with like a very heavy diagnosis medically. And so those kinds of resources and knowing what's out there is great, especially if you work with certain populations of people, or you plan on this population really interests you. I would really recognize the tools that are out there. I think there's a lot of rejection and family fear, and so people can feel very isolated and alone. Even though there's a lot more knowledge, and I do think knowledge is power, I think a lot of people don't educate themselves in certain areas of their life because they feel like it won't matter, or they just don't. And so then like fear takes over, and when fear takes over, that's when people tend to be a little irrational, don't react in a loving and kind way. And that's not good or helpful, or, that creates more grief and more loss for somebody. And it can affect their ideas of, now what do my romantic relationships look like? Like, can I ever have a partner or a spouse or have children? All those things. All those are hard questions. Hopefully a person who's been diagnosed is underneath a doctor's care, is getting the treatment that they need, which that can be a whole thing with health insurance. And there's a whole, we could go on for this forever with health insurance and medication and how hard it is to get sometimes the things that you need. And there can be those complications and or difficulties with this, depending on healthcare or what their healthcare is. I'm sure the meds are not cheap and they're expensive. And so do they have access to the care that they need in order to get the help that they need? And so all those things that you could help probably advocate with them for, work with them or challenge them, or maybe even do your own little research to help give them suggestions. I know there's even funds or nonprofits that help with medication for AIDS patients, HIV patients. And so, that's something that that you may come across with your patients. And I think the main thing is having a warm regard and being empathetic and meeting the person where they're at from a spiritual perspective. I think we can meet them where they're at, where the Lord would meet them, where Jesus would meet them, and he would come alongside them in their journey, and give them hope still and purpose, despite hard news, and a hard diagnosis where there's not always a lot of answers. Those are things that I think Christ would do. And so Christ would surround them and love them. And I think that's what we would do as a clinician, obviously within the realm of our, the state of California and things of that nature. So we just need to make sure that we are following the legal and ethical guidelines, of course, but that's how, from a Christian perspective, I think we can meet our clients where they're at. And, if they want prayer, we can pray with them. I think this might be a time to turn to the Lord and try to seek comfort from God and healing and restoration, and I'm not even necessarily talking about physical healing. Not to say a person can't pray for that, but like even just like whatever's going on in their spiritual being, like spiritual healing. I think when someone gets a diagnosis that's terminal, there's some level of having to make friends with death, which sounds very strange. But the reality is, like, there's something ticking. You don't know the date or the time because, like I said, AIDS and HIV are very manageable. Maybe there's many years that you'll be on this earth, and none of us know our days. Like, all of us are going to make friends with death. But I think it becomes more real when someone's been told, like, well, your clock is ticking, I don't think every one of us every day when we wake up necessarily thinks that. And so that might be part of this process too, of like, they might have a lot of questions about eternity and where they go and what does it look like to get prepared for that and all those kinds of things. So it brings up a lot of long-term issues that maybe you would deal with an aging adult, but it might be someone who's much younger dealing with these same things because of the diagnosis that they've been given. Because it feels like a life sentence once they initially get it, potentially. So these are things that, you need to be mindful of. You don't need to be scared. You can't contract AIDS from necessarily a sneeze, right? You can't contract it from being in a room with someone sitting there. I mean, it's a human being. I think it's just to be mindful of, like, if you don't understand something, it's not wrong to ask a question. Because this is a person. It's a person who's been faced with something that's really hard. And regardless of how they contracted it, it's terrible that they have it. And that can be very overwhelming for someone when they get that news. So, and some of you might know people in your own life that has been given this diagnosis, and you've watched them struggle or be challenged or face their family the first time when they told everybody. And you may have firsthand seen what that's been like for them. And so you know how hard and challenging it's been. So I'm thankful for medical advancement and that there is more success in people living a full life despite a diagnosis, and even like getting the numbers so low that they don't even show as being HIV positive, which is pretty awesome. Anyways, I hope you guys all have a great week 4. We are halfway done, and then we will keep moving along here until we're all done. Have a great day.